Hi, I'm Kirk Schneider, and I'm very honored to be a part of this panel with Ron Boyer, Ilene Serlin, Stanley Krippner, and Phil Zimbardo to speak about America post-Trump, and in particular, an area that I've been focusing on passionately, how to depolarize and engage in bridge building in the wake of this era. So I want to begin with some theoretical discussions, and I'm going to look at some notes here. First, I want to speak about a direct line of research to set the table for the rest of my talk, which is on healing dialogues as a national priority. And I want to talk about a direct line of research that's too often underappreciated between Otto Rank, Ernest Becker, and the recent social psychological findings of terror management theory. I will then connect this research to my own work on awe, the humility and wonder, sense of adventure toward living, and the new dialogue movements in our country, dialogues building bridges with the designated other. So let's start at the beginning. And I mean the beginning, before Donald Trump, before the George Floyd debacle, before mercantilism, autocracy, and slavery, even before the point at which Homo sapiens began to permeate the earth. Let's begin with our awakening to consciousness. And I mean everyone's awakening, including our distant ancestors. So this is something that pervades cultures, history, transcends cultures, history, and lives. And that is the awakening of consciousness at birth, and by implication, our awareness of death at this awakening. This is the point at which each of us encounters difference, as Otto Rank has put it so eloquently in a number of his works, and I'll be drawing mainly from Beyond Psychology, Art and Artist, and Will Therapy. His psychology of difference, that is, this is where we encounter radical otherness, foreignness, anxiety, the unbound and the uncontrolled for the first time. We move from a place of pervasive quiescence, being held in the womb, non-existence even, to sudden explosive existence, possibilities, the uncontained, literally. Rank calls this the trauma of birth. But of course, he and folks like his great expositor, Ernest Becker, knew it was much more than a birth trauma. It's a trauma of the encounter with radical mystery, the measureless and borderless cosmos itself. So yes, it has a physical dimension, but it has very much a psychological or psycho-spiritual dimension. It is the point at which we realize, or better yet, glimpse, that we are the cosmic mystery, and eventually the cosmic dust. Now that is too much for any one of us to fully take in, I believe, just as infinity is too much for anyone to take in. But the issue is, how is it negotiated by our parents, our culture, the systems within which we live? And this is the critical issue. For this will determine to a large degree whether much of our lives are fear-driven and polarized, that is fixated on single points of view to the utter exclusion of competing points of view, or whether we feel ontologically secure, as R.D. Laing so eloquently put it. That is secure in our own being, our sense of being. secure in existence, enough to begin to inquire into, to play with, to engage this cosmic vastitude. Unfortunately, too many people in our society and world don't negotiate this cosmic dilemma very well. Very quickly, it gets covered over by rules and regulations that are necessary in many instances, but in other instances oppress and repress a child's natural capacity to experience the world. And in particular, that which is other, different, or foreign. And again, try to sense the resonance between what appears to happen phenomenologically at birth and what I'm speaking about in terms of our encounter with radical otherness, that which is different, that which is a shock to our system. This split forms the basis for fear when it is left unaddressed. Hence, if a child is constantly kept from witnessing things and people who are foreign to its immediate family or cultural system, then those things and people tend to get stuck in the child's matrix of primal threats and fears. And they remain unintegrated others, in other words, just as the others in his or her shock of being expelled from the womb. Furthermore, if one of those others happens to actually become threatening in the child's life, that is, the child hears about someone or something that's other in their lives, where they have an unfortunate encounter with something or someone who's other in regard to their familiar and routine cultural or familial system, then that other becomes doubly or triply threatening because it's compounded by unmediated birth trauma that was never really integrated into that child's way of being. So here we can see how the absence of conversation and inquiry into otherness can be so damaging from an early age, very early age. But we can also see how this is not just an intellectual or behavioral problem, but one that is very deeply felt and in fact inarticulable for many, probably most of us. Furthermore, we can see that precisely for these above reasons, that highly intellectualized or behavioral interventions and forms of mediation are very often partial to address these deeply held reactivities. These reactivities that really seem to form in our cellular structure, as trauma researchers such as van der Kolk have uncovered. And that experiential, that is felt or embodied encounters with the split off parts of ourselves are imperative, at least for many of us, for fundamental healing to occur. Because what needs to happen is that one needs to almost figuratively and literally reoccupy the parts of oneself that become split off in that original trauma of birth. And if one is not held and worked with through conversation, through understanding, sensitivity on the part of the culture and the parental system, then those split off areas remain. And one is literally and figuratively divided, not reoccupying their fuller capacity to live. So this tenet is the fundamental basis on which the Experiential Democracy Dialogue revolves. This is the democracy, the dialogue format that I'm about to go in depth into. The Experiential Democracy Dialogue is a one-on-one dialogue format that aims at not just exchanging information about people's diverse backgrounds, but cultivating a capacity to be more fully present in such interchanges and within oneself. And this then can create conditions for bridge building and healing to be enhanced between oneself and the other, both in oneself and one's partner. So the first thing that strikes me about difficult conversations, whether of race, politics, or religion, is how quickly they devolve into either verbal flame throwing, violence, or simply withdrawal and avoidance. Obviously, the recent events at the Capitol and in city streets magnify this observation. But what is it, I ask myself, that causes such inflamed reactions? How is it that we get stung by such conversations so quickly? And what steps can we take to address the situation, to break the vicious cycle? This is what I set out to investigate in my books, The Polarized Mind and The Depolarizing of America. And here's what I found out. The basis for this cycle is what I call the polarized mind, which I just alluded to before. The polarized mind I define as the fixation on a single point of view to the utter exclusion of competing points of view. And I think that it's probably caused more destruction and mayhem throughout history than just about any other psychological phenomenon, cross-culturally and cross-individually. And the polarized mind, it's important to note, is expressed non-verbally as well as verbally. So let's consider a couple of examples of the polarized mind and see if you can relate to these examples in your own lives. And these hopefully will set the stage for the need for the healing dialogue that I'm about to present. So here's one example. Oh, you're one of those fruit and nut jobs from the coast who hasn't got a clue. With your cushy life, you have no idea what it's like to have a real job, to live paycheck to paycheck with people you've known all your life, and to be dedicated to a way of life that defends moral Christian values against the shoddy values of immigrants and terrorists. And here's from the other side. You're just an ignorant slob who has nothing going on in his life except a big truck, TV, sports channels, and a Colt 45. You're a loser who hates anyone or anything that might expose your hollow way of life. You profess Christian values, Christian morality, but you could care less about true Christian or any other kind of morality. All right, now just pause a moment and think of all the stereotypes and belittlements in those two statements about flesh and blood human beings. Think of how much people's lives are distorted and reduced by such inflammatory phrases. Phrases such as fruit and nut jobs, being from the coast, not having a real job, or toward the other party, being called an ignorant slob who buys trucks and guns for a hollow life. Think of how much any or most of us would feel put down and resentful by just those two descriptions of the other. And yet this is exactly what we so often express and feel in varying degrees in everyday America. And I'm sure you felt this with people in your community, perhaps, maybe with friends or family. In my experience and research, the chief basis for these vicious cycles of polarization, again, is fear. And in particular, the fear of insignificance, of not mattering. And once that trigger point is established, all bets are off. The themes, the belittlements get amplified, with both parties going back and forth endlessly in a spiraling trap. The Greeks call this hubris nemesis, lashing out and lashing back. And of course, many of you know how extremely destructive that was in Greek times, but not at all unique to ancient Greece or any other time in human history. We never really seem to learn very fully about the need to address these cycles in ourselves in a mass way. So this webinar is going to provide one time-tested way to help people address these fears that fuel the polarized mind and that lead to the vicious cycle. I call it the Experiential Democracy Dialogue, and it derives from my own experience developing this approach over a 15-year period, as well as my work as a trained moderator for the grassroots citizens movement called Braver Angels. Braver Angels has been around since the election of President Trump. Is an organization that attempts to bring self-identified liberals and conservatives together for living room style dialogues. What I've attempted to do with this experiential democracy dialogue is to emphasize just that, more of the experiential dimension, a more intimate element in the very highly supportive and structured dialogue approach that Braver Angels, to a great extent, echoes with its work, although it focuses more on group processes. And again, this is one-on-one. Okay, so now I'd like to show some slides. And if you'll bear with me a moment, I'm about to do that. Okay, so this is the practical application of my session. Again, it's very important to note that this framework has a very strong structure, and that it is very helpful to read The Depolarizing of America, a guidebook for social healing, which I wrote recently to look at the many facets of this approach, and recognize that it involves very strong ground rules that I'm about to go into, and a very structured approach that is focused on the credo, really, of Braver Angels, which is emphasizing curiosity, respect, and openness, which is very close to my own inquiries into an attempt to cultivate the sense of awe or humility and wonder, sense of adventure toward living, that I believe is a very strong basis for working with this dialogue. So first we need to focus in on the ground rules of this approach. These are crucial. If people don't pay attention to the ground rules, they're going to very quickly devolve into, as I mentioned before, verbal flame throwing, violence, withdrawal. So many of the symptoms that we see every day in our lives and in our current society. Many of these ground rules derive from braver angels, but they have elements of my own perspective to them. So first, it's very important that we realize that partners realize in this approach that they're here to understand and learn about each other and not to change each other's minds. The idea of really attempting to come from a place of genuine interest and curiosity about the other. I know that is not an easy thing to do, but we emphasize that right from the beginning in this approach, including in these ground rules, because as you might notice, it sets a whole different tone than coming at someone to make a point or to accuse them of something because of their other side, or to change their mind. So another point is to try to speak for oneself and not necessarily a party, which is so easy to do. Sticking with the spirit of the activities, it's a 6-phase approach, which I'll go into momentarily. Very important to recognize the nonverbal as well as verbal elements that can get in the way. So we try to encourage people not to roll their eyes or to have big sighs in response to the other speaking. So bring your best self. And many of us as psychologists, as therapists, realize what this means. We have an awful lot of training in it. And I hope that many of us will rally around this cause and join in to spreading experiential democracy dialogues in communities and family settings and work settings even, and legislative settings even. So initially, this is the setup phase, and this is where partners decide. Generally, we divide people into liberal and conservatives for these dialogues because those seem to be the most charged polarization points, but people don't have to stick to those. I'm going to do that for purposes of illustration here, however. It's also important to note that even if you get two partners who are relatively liberal or relatively conservative, it can be very helpful, especially if these partners are to be facilitators of this dialogue approach, for each partner or for one of the partners to attempt to role play and embody the other. So if one of the partners leans liberal, to role play a conservative as we go through this dialogue can be very helpful in empathizing more with a conservative, or vice versa. The conservative partner embodying a liberal in the dialogue. These are just some suggestions about the topics that can be taken up. Many topics that could be looked at today, including wearing masks and social distancing, election fraud, renaming schools and monuments, what some call cancel culture, conspiracy theories, defunding the police, quote unquote, BIPOC reparations, BLM movement, First Amendment rights, gun rights, Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Many possibilities for dialogue here. So this is phase one of the Experiential Democracy Dialogue, where each partner, first of all, before even talking to one another about where they stand on a given issue, after choosing the issue, just taking a few moments to visualize what it might be like to engage that partner in regard to this charged issue, let's say racism. What are the thoughts, feelings, body sensations that come up, images, and to see if each partner can observe those as if they might observe a river going by, rather than getting stuck on any one. And that's a very important context of curiosity in this approach, observing rather than fixating. And then attempt to see the humanity in each other, clear a space for trying to see this person as truly another human being with their own story and their own wounds. Then we go into the background phase. I realize I just have a couple of minutes here, so I'm going to speed up a bit, where each partner is invited to talk about what it was like to grow up, to get more of a context of where they're coming from, and how the other, whoever that other was, in terms of their particular topic, was treated by their family system. And then each partner has a chance to do this. And these are all about really humanizing the dialogue, as opposed to seeing each other as stereotypes or labels, which we so often do subconsciously in our culture. Phase three is taking a stance. And that's where each partner gets a chance to describe intimately where they stand in terms of, let's say, racism or the pandemic. And then the listening partner has time to reflect back what they heard, the essence of what they heard. And the speaking partner has a chance to correct it. And then they rotate. This is the stereotypes exercise developed by Braver Angels, find particularly illuminating. This is a chance for each partner to, first of all, identify how they've been stereotyped, how they feel put down so often by those critical of them, and to describe that to each other, again, without interruption. And then for that speaking partner to identify the false and misleading aspects of those stereotypes, so that they fill out the picture of their humanity, more of the nuances of who they are beyond the label, and then finally humble themselves about nuggets of truth to the stereotypes, which are so often true and present. And it's also a way of making each other more accessible to one another, because you're acknowledging the many sides of this conflict that you're both embroiled in. The fifth phase is to ask a question of one another, and to, again, come from a place of curiosity, of genuine interest, as much as possible. Don't include answers in the question or accusations. Emphasize I statements. I'm wondering, how you formed your position, given that the president at the time said such and such. And both partners obviously get to respond. Time permitting, they can follow up with another question and a quick response. And then in the final phase, this is the discovery results phase, the partners take time to look at what have they learned. What have they learned about themselves? What have they learned about each other? And in particular, has there been any potential for common ground through this learning? And so often there is. The research shows that post-workshop, Braver Angel workshop, showed with 1,800 participants that the vast majority felt more understood by the other, by their partner, and also that they understood their partner significantly more after going through the workshop, and that they were also significantly less angry and estranged at each other after the workshop, which also enhanced the likelihood of finding common ground. And this is sometimes just more of a feeling. It's often just a very human feeling, a fellow feeling about the other in terms of something they shared about their background. It may not even have to do with the policy or the particular issue that they're talking about, but a resonance with their humanity. And sometimes it's an actionable common ground that they're both willing to work on. I can say that I have been deeply moved by these meetings, both the Experiential Democracy Dialogue engagements as well as Braver Angels. And I highly recommend that you look into these and consider giving them a try in your own life. I thank you very much for your time.